So what does a season marked by failure really look like? I hope no one here is currently going through that, where your mind immediately went to right now. Look around my life and you'll see it. But, even if you aren't going through something or haven't gone through something recently and your memory is dim over a failure or a season of failure, all of us will experience it. I remember taking my scuba diver instructor's exam. Part of the exam is going through a mock in-water lesson where the other instructor candidates are the students, and each one of us has to take turns teaching one skill. Mine was the controlled descent. So we swam out, and us students, with me pretending to be the instructor, was to give the signal and then monitor everybody going down. And we all knew the drill because everybody had been given a fail to do on somebody else's teaching moment. And so then the instructor evaluator was going to see how we reacted to the fail. And so another student, as soon as I gave the signal to descend, just dropped like a rock. That's pretty much the only way to screw up the controlled descent. So I was pretty much expecting this, and I reached for him, and I can still see vividly as I reached and just missed. He had put extra weight in his BC, so that when he let the air out, he just went. Now, he did that because he was trying to be a good failure. I don't think it was anything personal, but that was it. I had failed. I remember thinking, even underwater, as we continued going through the dive and going through all of the other students, how badly I felt. I had flown from where we lived in Chicago down to Florida to take this exam, and I knew what I was doing. I'd been diving for a long time. I'd aced every other part of the exam, the written portion, all of the skills. And I even knew how to react to the mock student's problem. But I failed, and it hurt. We know the pain of failure. It's part of life. As Wesley told Buttercup in The Princess Bride, life is pain. Anyone who says otherwise is selling something. And when I think about where we can turn in the Bible to understand how to deal with different seasons of failure, my mind goes to David. Not that part of David's story when Samuel anointed him, Saul's still the king, and Samuel anoints Jesse's youngest son. Not David the shepherd boy as King Saul's successor. Not David the one who slew Goliath. Not David defeating the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Moabites, or the Amalekites. But I'm thinking of David and Bathsheba. And to understand the story of David and Bathsheba, we might need to change our point of view. And now, how do we shift our perspective regarding the story of David and Bathsheba? Because it's a familiar story. Probably even before Will read the passage, we could have all gone through the main highlight points. David goes out in the evening for a little stroll. He looks down and sees this beautiful woman bathing. He calls and says, "Find out who that is." Then he has her brought to the palace. He rapes her, sends her back, then finds out she's pregnant, sends for her husband, who's been off fighting in his war, to try to cover up his tracks. And then when Uriah the Hittite comes home out of solidarity with the troops, he won't go home to his wife. And so David then sends him to the front line, along with the message, his own message, to General Joab. Take this message to General Joab and make sure he sees it. And General Joab opens the message that says, "Put this guy, Uriah the Hittite, on the front line and let me know when he's dead." These are the main points of the story. And it's a story that starts off with an affair, or more accurately, rape, and ends with murder. It's familiar, so what can it tell us for today? What can it say about seasons of failure in our lives? Well, let's change the perspective around. Let's shift our lens from seeing the world through King David's eyes, David of the Psalms, David the superstar of the Hebrew Bible. The other day I was reading this passage and I was thinking it through, and I had books on my desk, and it was one of those beautiful days outside. The sun was out. It was just the right temperature, finally. We've all been waiting. And here I was, captured, trapped in this office with a great window, but all these books, and I thought, I really need to spend some time with my friends Karl Barth and Juan Luis Segundo and Paul Tillich to get into the theology of this passage. And I had these books, and I thought, I'll go outside and read. Except so often, if I went out to one of the benches, someone might see me and say, I see you're reading. Can I ask an unrelated question? And so I thought, well, where can I go? And I really want to be outside. So I went up to the east roof up here. I didn't damage it for those on the Building and Grounds Committee. But I sat down and I spread my books out and I had a bottle of water there and I was thinking this passage through, and some of the houses and apartments to the north are just below the roof line, and I was sort of looking down on them. But then the battle building is right above the roof, and it's looking down at me. And that new hotel down the street, is it called the Draftsman? Just a little to the east, it was looking down at me. And all of a sudden, I felt a new sense of this passage, a new view of Bathsheba on the roof. Now, I can't imagine Bathsheba's experience. I admit that. There are a lot of reasons why I can't see things from her perspective. Male privilege, white privilege, American privilege, and probably advantages that I have that I don't even really fully realize. So I can't truly step inside her world and see things from her perspective, but I can try. And going back through time and trying to imagine what that would have been like, I was picturing a warm afternoon, late afternoon, not the bright day where I was outside, but that time where it's still light, but the sun is sort of setting. You can see fairly clearly, but you're getting the sense of evening is upon us. And I thought about her thinking, this is a good time to clean myself. Bathing wasn't an everyday occurrence in ancient times. It was kind of a special occasion. And she would have probably had some sort of pitcher, most likely with rainwater in it. And so she would have gone up to the roof where she would have felt like she was away from the visibility of all of those who were around her. Maybe not even thinking about the battle building or the draftsman. And as she went up and poured the pitcher over her and felt herself getting clean and maybe refreshed, getting the dust and dirt off, she wouldn't have had any idea of someone right above watching down. Her first clue would have probably been sometime later when she was dry and clothed and inside, and some messengers from the palace came and said, Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, wife of Uriah the Hittite, we'd like you to come with us. Now, trying to picture her perspective, I wonder what she thought. Her husband Uriah was away fighting the king's battle, and I can imagine her being afraid. What do they want? This is a strange time of the day to be summoned. Where are we going? When she reached the palace and met King David, I can envision her shock. I can picture her trying to choke back the words of disgust when she realized that nice feeling she had of getting clean and having water pouring over her was when this lecherous king was ogling her. I bet she felt exposed, powerless, and vulnerable. And what happens next is R-rated. David raped Bathsheba, Now, people have been trying to make sense of this and rationalize it and come to some other interpretation from time immemorial. Not David, not Jesse's youngest, not the shepherd boy, not the one Samuel chose over Eliab and Abinadab, those strapping boys of Jesse who Samuel just walked right on by. Not this one, not that one. Do you have any more? Well, there's the boy. He's out in the field with the sheep. Not that David, not the David who slew Goliath, not David who defeated the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Moabites, and who will, after this story, go on to defeat the Amalekites. 1 Samuel identifies David as a person after God's own heart. Acts 13:22 goes on again to call him that. So what happened? People have tried to come up with all kinds of creative ways to make sense of this story and his actions and his failure. What about Bathsheba? Wasn't she a bit of a seductress? I mean, who goes around naked on the roof? Maybe she was a co-conspirator. After all, she was out there in plain sight of the palace. Surely she knew someone had to be looking. No, absolutely not. Flag on the field, loss of down and 15-yard penalty. She had no power, no agency, no options, and no choice in this story. Putting any part of this story on her is victim blaming in the first order. The Hebrew grammar tells it all. We don't have to go back and put anything into the text that wasn't there. There was a wonderful article I read that asked about ancient concepts of rape versus our contemporary concepts, and even using the ancient rules alone, David violated her personhood. David is the subject throughout 2 Samuel chapter 11, and Bathsheba is always the object. He acted. He had a choice. She didn't. She didn't have any choice. When the king's messengers arrived to summon her to the palace, she couldn't just say, "No, thank you." What about romanticizing it? I'm sure you've all heard someone list David and Bathsheba alongside Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra as one of the great love stories of all time. If you've seen the 1951 film with Gregory Peck and Susan Hayward, David and Bathsheba, you might be forgiven for thinking they were in love if you saw the film and didn't read the Bible. Romances don't begin with taking and end with murder. The Bible doesn't tell us what Bathsheba felt. It doesn't tell the story from her perspective. One of the greatest miracles around this story is the fact that we have it at all. Think about that. And the number of hands that the Hebrew Bible has gone through over the years, this would certainly have been one of those stories that some person transcribing it would have had the temptation to say, "Oops, I dropped a piece of paper," and leave out. Because then David's reputation is unsullied, and we get to continue with this trajectory of a person after God's own heart throughout the arc of his story without this ugliness, without having to make sense of it. I could see someone saying, "Let's just pretend this never happened." But the story survived for a reason. The Holy Spirit isn't just active today. The Holy Spirit has been active throughout history. And that may be evidence of the Holy Spirit's activity, that we have this story in our Bibles, this story that would have been so convenient to just lose or misplace. The story survived to teach us something about God. Something about forgiveness, something about turning setbacks and catastrophic, sin-filled fails into comebacks and grace-filled transformation. I can't explain why David did what he did. I'm not going to even try. I'm not going to psychoanalyze someone from thousands of years ago, and I'm not going to try to make sense of it in some sort of and retroject some idea of romance or victim blaming or anything else. David's sin is fantastic, not in a good way fantastic. Awesome, not in a good awesome, but oh my gosh, I can't believe he did that. And maybe some people use it to rationalize their own failures, whether it's a personal failure like a sin or something that happens to us. But everybody experiences these seasons of failure, whether we're a part of it, like David very much was, or it's a loss, or a rejection, or something over which we had no control, or something over which our control is debatable, like failing a scuba diver instructor's exam. God still used David, no matter how big our season of failure is, and no matter where the cause is, God was still at work. Just as long as there's another day, there is a chance to start a new season. Not a season of failure, but a season of growth in God. And that's the thing about David. He didn't stay in this season of failure. A little later in 2 Samuel 12, and it took Nathan the prophet to help him come to this realization, but he saw what he had done, and he repented. He turned away from those actions, not in a way of denial, but he turned away in a way of turning away from his sinfulness and to God. David sought God's forgiveness. We don't have to stay in our seasons of failure. Every day is an opportunity to start something new. When I failed my scuba diver instructor's exam, I had a choice. I could stay and remain someone who almost became a scuba diving instructor. It was just, this close, just about this far from my fingertips to another diver. About a month later, I went back to Florida. This time Melanie went with me, and we decided that we were going to make it into a fun trip no matter what happened when I retook the exam. And when I went into the in-water portion, and I don't even remember, I have no idea what my skill was that second time. But I had some skill. I was supposed to teach the other divers. Everything went perfect. It was flawless. And the examiner, after we got out into the water, said, "That was perfect. Why didn't you do that the first time?" I just didn't. I don't think I said anything. Hard to believe. No matter what we face, God is bigger than our seasons of failures. God is bigger than our problems, and if we seek, we will find. If we ask God for the strength to get through whatever we encounter, God will lead us forward. It may not be the way that we wanted. It may not turn out exactly the way we imagined, but we can learn from these seasons. We can learn from David, and every day is an opportunity. Our worst day never has to be our last. Amen.